Welcome to the session of the Reference Desk, and it's different parts of the world. It's the 14th and 15th of May of 2022. And we're speaking with Moojan Momen, who has had a remarkable career in Babi and Baha'i studies at the same time as his other career in medicine. And along the path of doing his own scholarship, Moojan became one of the trustees of the collection of the late hand of the cause Hassan Balyuzi, which eventually became the Afnan Library. Now, Moojan came to the Landig conference in 2002 and indicated this project was in its early stages. And at this point, 2 decades after that conference, we're able to hear from Moojan about the progress of the project. It is now, since 2015, been established, and it also has an online presence. And in this session, Moojan is going to explain the project, its current condition, and introduce us generally to the Afnan Library. So welcome, Moojan. Over to you for your presentation.
Thank you very much, Graham. Yes, I'm going to talk about the history and the present state of the Afnan Library. And I'm going to start by just sharing my screen. And this building, you're seeing this full screen now, are you?
Correct.
Yeah. This building is the front of the present Afnan Library. It's situated in Sandy in Bedfordshire, which is about an hour north of London. And the building itself, well, I'll just go on to talk a little bit about the history of the Afnan Library. This picture in the bottom right is of Mr. Hassan Balyuzi, who, the hand of the cause, who passed away on the 12th of February 1980. Shortly before he passed away, he had talked to me about this project of wanting his books and documents to form a library, but we hadn't discussed it in any great detail, and his passing away was rather sudden. So what we had when he did pass away were some pieces of paper, 3 or 4 pieces of paper, on which he'd written his wishes regarding the library, and they were stuck inside his will. But his family managed to get these pieces of paper legally incorporated into the will, so they are now legally part of the will. And on these 3 or 4 pieces of paper, he makes a number of statements about the trustees of the library and so on. But the main point I want to make is that he says, his words are, "I wish my library and documents to be kept perpetually in the name of my father, Mubakar ad-Dawla, for the benefit of all who seek knowledge, and added to as time goes by." And then on another piece of paper, he says, "I wish my library to be named after the wife of the Bab, which will be the Afnan Library, dedicated to Khadija Begum, the wife of the Bab." So this was the sort of foundational document for the library. And we've tried to sort of, as it were, be faithful to his wishes. And one of the statements that you can see there is that it's both his library, in other words, his books and documents. So it's both parts of both of those things. And that it should be for the benefit of all who seek knowledge. In other words, we shouldn't try to unduly restrict people who have access to it, and added to as time goes by. So in other words, it's not just a sort of a museum piece of just his things and sort of static and frozen in time, but that it should be an expanding library. As I say, that was the basis for the library. And following the passing of Mr. Balyuzi, also in those pieces of paper, he had nominated his wife, his son Robert, and myself to be the trustees of the library. And we got together and also consulted with the Universal House of Justice and with the National Spiritual Assembly about the best way of proceeding with this. And the House of Justice was kind enough to send a number of letters. And in one of the letters written on behalf of the House of Justice by the Secretariat, it says, the House of Justice views the final accomplishment of the wishes of the late hand of the cause in respect to the Afnan Trust as of the very greatest importance. And the House of Justice has been, as it were, supporting us in many different ways, or right from that very early period. So we also consulted both the National Spiritual Assembly and the Universal House of Justice about drawing up the Declaration of Trust. And the Afnan Library was set up and registered as a charity with a Declaration of Trust in 1982. And it was registered with the Charity Commission of the United Kingdom in the same year. It was, this was, as I say, in consultation with the Universal House of Justice, that it was set up not as a sort of a branch of the National Spiritual Assembly, but as a totally separate charity. To the National Spiritual Assembly is also a registered charity, and the Afnan Library is a separate charity. But actually, sorry, there should be another slide. No. Okay. Well, part of the Declaration of Trust was that we drew up was that the National Assembly would have a trustee on the Board of Trustees. So the trustees were expanded to include an appointee of the National Spiritual Assembly. And subsequently, just a few years ago, we revised the Declaration of Trust and allowed for more trustees to be appointed by the National Spiritual Assembly, such that the National Spiritual Assembly will always be appointing a majority of the trustees on the Board of Trustees. So we faced with the problem of having a lot of books and papers, because Mr. Bailuzi had a large library and a lot of papers, and but we had no money, and we made an appeal for money which raised a certain amount, but it wasn't enough to buy a building by any means. At that point, which was I think it was about 1986, the National Spiritual Assembly gave us the use of 2 rooms in Esselmont House, which was at that time the sub-office of the National Spiritual Assembly in a town called Uckfield, which is to the south of London. And we were able to make use of the services of Jan Yassian, who had previously been a librarian at the World Centre, and Gaynor Carter was another professional librarian, and both of them lived in that part of the world. And we were able to make use of their services in getting the library. We had 2 rooms, and we managed to get bookshelves up on the walls of these rooms and put these books out. However, what happened a few years later was that structural defects were found in the building, and it had to be evacuated. So the library was packed up into boxes and stored at the Baha'i Publishing Trust's warehouse facilities, which at that time were in Ketton near Oakham. Then in 1998, we were fortunate enough to have a Baha'i donate us sufficient money to buy a house in North London, not very far from the Guardian's resting place. And we moved all the boxes of books from Ketton to this building. But it fairly soon became apparent that the building wasn't a suitable place for the library, and we never really even got most of the books out of their boxes. We just sort of sat with the whole thing there for a couple of years trying to figure out what to do. And in December 2001, the National Spiritual Assembly proposed that the library sell this building that it had in North London and put the funds obtained from that sale towards a building they, after they'd moved out of Asselmont House, they were renting offices in a building in Tunbridge to be the sub-office of the National Spiritual Assembly. And they had an opportunity to buy that building, which also had other offices of other companies and so on in the building. But they bought the whole building with the help of the Afnan Library. The Afnan Library agreed to this proposal. We took part of the first floor of the building, about 180 square meters. And the rest of that floor was the National Assembly sub-office, and there was, as I say, there were other companies occupying the other floors of this building in Tunbridge, which is also to the south of London. Now, this was a very good space. We got the shelving out and put books up on, put the shelving out and put books up on the shelving, and started even to catalogue some of the books. However, it was not very convenient for myself because I live an hour to the north of London. This was an hour to the south of London, and getting either through or around London is a huge problem. So it used to take me sort of 2 or 3 hours to get down there, depending on the traffic. And, you know, by the time you got there, there was scarcely any time to do anything very much before you started having to come back. So it wasn't the ideal place from my point of view. And by that time, Jan Yassi and Gaynor Carter were no longer available. It wasn't ideal, let's put it that way. However, so anyway, what happened was that in 2007, the Afnan Library was informed by the National Spiritual Assembly that it wanted to sell the Tunbridge building, and it asked the Afnan Library to clear the area that it occupied in order to facilitate this sale. So the books and the other assets of the library were packed up again and sent to the warehouse of the Baha'i Books UK, which had moved to be in Oakham by that time. However, this corresponded with a downturn in the economy, and the library building simply didn't sell. So we were in a state of limbo from 2007 to 2012, with the library building in Tunbridge not selling, us not having any money to buy a new building, and all our books packed up in boxes in Oakham. Fortunately, in 2012, we were able to obtain a further sum of money, and we purchased this an old Baptist chapel in Sandy. Now, it's actually built in 1854, so it's only 10 years younger than the faith itself, but it was completely refurbished with all the brickwork being repointed, and we thought it was a new roof had been put on, but actually it's now turned out it wasn't actually a new roof. It was the old slates were reset in the roof, and that's now causing us some problems. But anyway, very nicely redone. Then it was sold to a company that got an architect to design the inside of the building as a call center. And so what you're going to see on the next few pictures of the inside of the building, none of that has been done by the Afnan Library, apart from putting bookshelves in. All of the structural features, this call center, this company that was a call center, actually put in a floor, because a chapel is just one huge room, and they put in a floor to make it 2 floors, a staircase going up. All the glasswork that you see and so on in the next few slides are all done by this company. We've done no structural changes to what this company designed for itself. Oh, something's gone wrong again. Sorry. Start again. Okay, so this probably shows everything you'd need to see anyway. The picture in the top right shows the entrance there on the left. This is the front entrance with the post box and so on. So that you come in through this door, there's this sort of area, reception area, whatever you want to call it. As you come in through the door, you go through these doors and into the ground floor, or you can come up these stairs, and it's up the stairs where we've put the main bookshelves for the library. And these bookshelves we got custom made for the library, you know, to fit the dimensions of the room that we had. Originally they were going to go downstairs, but the downstairs room has these pillars holding up the floor, this floor, and the pillars meant that if you put bookshelves on either side of the pillars, you couldn't actually go down the aisle to look at the books on the shelves. So that proved a non-starter, and we moved to having the bookshelves upstairs, and downstairs, which unfortunately you don't have pictures of, is basically just a couple of long tables and a large storage area, which is actually mostly the archives of the National Spiritual Assembly. But we've also got there the books of papers of Mr. Bagliuzzi, the boxes of papers of Mr. Bagliuzzi, and the papers of other people. I'll come on to the papers that we have in a minute. Yes, sorry. So this shows you the downstairs a little better. This picture shows you as you come in through the front door. This is what you see. This corridor, and on either side there is basically well, there's shelving on the end, but there's metal shelving on which are boxes. Some of them are the papers of the Afnan library, Mr. Bagliuzzi's papers and so on. And towards the back of the room is the NSA archives. And then you can, if you look upwards, you see the first floor. It's a sort of open plan entrance area. So you see both the downstairs and the upstairs floor as you come in through the front door, as it were. So in summary then, the Afnan libraries are intended to be a research library for Baha'i studies run by the Afnan Library Trust as a registered charity, founded in 1985 and in this present building since December 2013. I'm very frustrated because I had somewhere a much longer presentation. Oh, here we are. No, that's it. So basically what we have then is the Afnan Library as a charity with these books, and the books, what we've got is the core content, if you like, is Mr. Bagliuzzi's books. And among the things that are there among his books, he has a collection. He himself, I don't know how many of you are familiar with the life story of Mr. Bagliuzzi, but he worked and indeed he and one other individual set up the BBC Persian service, or the BBC World Service, Persian service. And he basically worked for that for the whole of his working life. And he was responsible for creating programs. So he would create programs, and the sort of programs he created were on the subjects of British history and culture, Iranian history and Iranian history and culture. And his library tends to reflect that. He's got a lot of books on history, both British history and European history, but also Iranian and Middle Eastern history, and also culture, poetry, art, and so on. And then, of course, there are the Baha'i books, and there are a lot of books on what you might call the study of religion. And so the library has more or less sort of made that the range of books that it is going to keep. So we're keeping all of Mr. Balyuzi's books on those subjects, plus any other books that are given to us. If they are in that subject range, we will keep them, otherwise not. But the main core is obviously the Baha'i books, firstly of Mr. Balyuzi, and then what we've collected since then. And Mr. Balyuzi had a lot of Baha'i books, obviously. He also had some of his father's old Persian books, lithograph, 19th century lithograph books of his father's. So there are some quite historic volumes there as well. So those are the books. And then we have Mr. Balyuzi's, at the core of the library is also his papers, and his papers include his correspondence, both with his friends, his family. There's a whole set of letters that he wrote to his mother, for example, that obviously that came to Mr. Balyuzi when his mother passed away. The letters written to other members of the family, and then letters from Baha'is, from work colleagues and other friends that he had. And there's the correspondence that came to him as, in the first place, he was on the National Spiritual Assembly of the Baha'is of Britain, and then he was a hand of the cause, and there is the correspondence that came to him in those capacities as well. And there are also papers, minutes, all sorts of documents that he collected. He basically, as his children tell me, never threw anything away. So we have a huge amount of material. They didn't give us everything he had, because that would have been overwhelming for us. We just got the material that's of Baha'i interest. And I think we can be pleased about that, because apparently he had a very large collection of crime fiction, for example, Agatha Christie's and that sort of thing. But we just got the Baha'i materials. And he also was given and kept some other Baha'i materials, like, for example, all the correspondence of Claudia Coles, who was an American Baha'i who moved to the UK. She moved just after the passing of. She became a Baha'i during the time of Abu Baha, but moved to the UK shortly after that. But was one of the very active early Baha'is. We have the papers of Lady Hornell, who was Mr. Balyuzi's mother-in-law. She was also a very early Baha'i, and we've got her papers. So these are all papers that Mr. Balyuzi collected and a part of his collection. And we have a lot of photographs. We have Mr. Balyuzi's kept. They're not really diaries as such. They are just his appointment books, as it were. He did keep he did keep a couple of travel logs and things, but not a systematic diary. But we also have papers that belong to his father. His father did keep some diaries over a period of about 10 or 15 years. He also has letter books, in which were copies of the letters that he sent to various people. As far as I can tell, most of these letterboxes are actually his official correspondence, because he was governor of Bushehr. Well, first of all, he was the Foreign Office agent for Bushehr and for Fars, for Shiraz, and later he was governor of Bushehr. And then when Britain occupied Bushehr at the beginning of the First World War, they exiled Mr. Balyuzi's father and Mr. Balyuzi as a young boy to India. So Mr. Balyuzi was raised in Pune in India and did a lot of his schooling there. And then in about 1918, he came back to Iran, and he became a minister in the government. He was appointed Minister for Public Works, but unfortunately he passed away very shortly after that. Um, so we have from his father, we have these letter books and diaries. We also have several volumes of just letters, early letters from the Afnan family that were found by Mr. Abul Qasim Afnan, who was a cousin of Mr. Badiusi, but he was also the custodian of the House of the Bab in Shiraz, and he had access to a huge number of archives, both related to the house, but also family just general Afnan family archives. And whenever he found something of interest, he would either send the original to Mr. Badiusi or a copy. And so we have a large number of early letters from the Afnan family, and from other early Baha'is as well, that Mr. Abul Qasim Afnan sent to Mr. Badiusi. Particularly when he was writing his book on the Bab, he would send him these very interesting letters, and Mr. Badiusi refers to some of them in his book. In addition, there are boxes of drafts and manuscripts and research notes and research papers related to the various books that he wrote. We've got sort of a box for each, more or less a box for each book, both of just research papers, this material that was sent to him relating to the book, his drafts of the manuscript, and so forth. Now, in addition to that, sorry, first of all, this does pose some problems for us because obviously in amongst all of these papers, there are sensitive materials. And in fact, in those notes that Mr. Badiusi wrote, he talks about that he didn't want anything that would be sensitive for individuals to be made publicly available. He was writing in particular in relation to his father's diary, but I think we can assume that he meant that generally for his papers. And also we've had guidance from the Universal House of Justice and from the British National Spiritual Assembly regarding this matter. What the House of Justice seems to be mainly concerned about is you might think that it's sort of materials related to covenant breakers and so on, but in fact, what they are more concerned about, and which we have to sort of look into, is whether there are materials there that relate to personal matters that people would not want made public, even about their ancestors. Because as a hand of the cause, he was privy to a lot that went on that perhaps people would not want made public, even if it's not about themselves, but about a member of their family. So at the moment, we actually have a committee of the National Assembly going through these papers and looking to see if, what exists of that sort of material, so that they can be separated and the papers made public. But until that process is finished, we can't really allow people access just to the papers. So if people come to the library at the moment, they're certainly able to look at the books, but we can't allow access to the papers until this process is finished. And then in addition to Mr. Badiusi's papers and books, we've had donations of large numbers of books. People have given whole libraries of books to us. Elderly people passing away, sometimes they've not had Baha'i relatives and they've given us the books. Sometimes they have had Baha'i relatives, but but their relatives have still given us the books. Some people have sort of, they're downsizing and they can't keep all their Baha'i books, so they've given us their books. Generally, we've received a very large number of books, and we have now processed all of that, and I think we're more or less up to date, but we just continually getting new books, so we're never quite up to date. We're only up to date up to the most recent lot of books that we've received and haven't yet processed, as it were. So we do, and we've listed all of the books that we have. But in addition to that, we've also been receiving papers. We've received papers from other individuals such as Marian Hoffman. We received her papers. We've received papers from Lois and Philip Hainsworth, who many of you may know. They were pioneers in East Africa for many years. And then also Philip Hainsworth was on the National Spiritual Assembly. They both before and after their period in Africa. We've received papers, the diaries of Charles Dunning, who was Knight of Baha'u'llah for the Orkney Islands. We've received, just recently received a large consignment of books that previously belonged to the Hand of the Cause, Dr. Varga. I had all of this written down on these slides that have disappeared, unfortunately, but where Carmel will probably fill us in on some of the things that I've missed out of the important ones. I mean, we've got loads and loads of small donations of bits and pieces, but the large important donations I'm desperately trying to think and go through. So those are the papers. And then another significant block of material that we have is that some time ago, I had the idea that the publisher, George Ronald, receives lots of manuscripts and can't possibly publish everything that it receives. And so it rejects probably 2/3, or I don't know what the exact proportion is, but a lot of manuscripts each year. And in among those manuscripts are actually ones that may be very valuable for future historians and for people who you know are looking at the faith in various ways, that they're just not commercially viable for George Ronald to print. So, for example, the memoirs of a pioneer to a small town in somewhere or other may not be a commercially viable venture for George Ronald to publish, but it could be very valuable for a historian in the future. So we have for the past 20 or 30 years been collecting reject manuscripts that George Ronald, with the permission of the authors, collecting these reject manuscripts, and not all of them, but the ones that are sort of significant and seem to be important for us to preserve. So that there's quite a number of boxes of these manuscripts. We also have a large number of newspaper cuttings. Mr. Baliuzi himself was an avid collector of newspaper cuttings. These were mainly general newspaper cuttings, in things that were going on the day that he cut them out, as it were, both in English and in Persian. But we also have a collection of newspaper cuttings because the National Spiritual Assembly subscribed to a cuttings agency that just picked up all the cuttings about the Baha'i faith in local and national newspapers in the United Kingdom. So we've got a large collection over a period of years. They're not still subscribing to the service, so we have a cut-off date, but we do have a lot of newspaper cuttings related to the faith in Britain. I think I mentioned photographs. We've got stacks and stacks of photographs. Unfortunately, a very large number of them are not identified, and we've been sort of carrying out an exercise and trying to identify some of the people in these photographs by putting them up online and getting some of the British Baha'is who sort of have memories going back into the past to look through and see if they can identify some of the people on these photographs. Okay, so that's a summary of what we have in the library. I'd just like to pass over to Carmel and let her talk about anything in the way of library holdings that I've forgotten to mention that's important, and also about the actual functioning of the library, how, what happens when it's open, how people can access it, and so forth. So over to you. Carmel is the main person who sort of runs the library on a day-to-day basis, and she's the person you need to contact if you want to come to the library, or if you have any books and so on that you want to send to the library. She's the person to contact. Yes, over to you, Carmel.
Thank you. Apologies, I'm not in my own house and the Eurovision Song Contest is happening. So one of the donations that we've also had, Dad, is Mr. Faizy's, is it papers we had sent over?
Yes.
So handed towards Mr. Faizy.
Yes, these are the papers that Gloria Faizy photocopied at the World Centre, or had in her possession when she was writing her book about the hand of the course, Mr. Faizy. She had all of these papers. She did most of the writing of the book in India, but towards the end of her life, she went to her sons in Australia. And so when she passed away, there were all these papers, and Nasan Faizy sent them to us. Yeah.
And then the other thing we have is a lot of journals that have been collected over the years from all around the world. It's not exhaustive, obviously. It's very based on whoever's donated papers and books, and they happen to have been amongst them, or they have their own collection. And we've been trying to flesh that out to fill in the gaps, but that's increasingly challenging to find the missing volumes. So that, I suppose, the main thing is it is a library that people can come to, should they happen to be in Bedfordshire, in the UK. And it's by appointment, because I'm not there every day, but we're very excited to have anyone who'd like to come and visit us and do their research. But we are also, because most people are not in Sandy and Bedfordshire, trying to make things accessible online. It's a very slow process, mostly done just by myself and scanning. And obviously we talked before about the problems we have with our catalogues and trying to make that accessible. So those are ongoing things, but mostly the day consists of scanning things in, cataloguing books. I try, and during the pandemic, it was wonderful to sit at home and catalogue individuals' papers. Gave me a great chance to just sit and do some very solid work on outlining what's in everyone's boxes, because obviously, as you can imagine, it's an endless process of deciphering what the papers are, trying to figure out what's important for people and what you might need to find in the future. And that's a very long, ongoing process. I'm trying to kind of do different individuals plus Mr. Bagliusi's things, and Adam Thorne, some of you would remember Adam Thorne, a Baha'i historian here in the UK, had gone through the boxes and identified what needed to be scanned of Mr. Bagliusi's photographs and papers. And I'm trying to now fulfill that. But a lot of these jobs are quite boring, as I'm sure many of you know. And so you kind of feel like you have to mix it up sometimes and get on with some other job. So I mix that up with other scanning of journals and yeah, I know, it's thrilling, super thrilling. So when Dad said we're up to date with the cataloguing, we've just had about 4 different loads of books come in from different places. And it's quite challenging, because what you would ideally want is to ask people to identify what they're going to give you, so you can reject it before it even arrives. But we tend to take it all in, and then in the past, pre-pandemic, we've been able to go to conventions and places to sell on things that we have as duplicates, obviously keeping the rarer things. But now they're beginning to stack up, and that's one of our challenges, is the using up of space by duplicate books, because people are, like Dad was saying, passing on, and they haven't got anyone to give these books to, or those people already own all of those books. So we really just want the rarer things now, but it's hard to pick and choose when you're on the phone. So what else can we say, Dad?
Well, oops, what's happened? What I was going to talk about some more is the online presence, as it were, that we have, and also this problem, discuss this problem we're having with the cataloging in terms of what software and so on to use. One of the things that we've done with the spare books that we have is to donate them to other libraries. So, for example, we've donated several boxes of books to I've forgotten the name of the college now. One of the colleges at Oxford that has a specialist Oriental Studies library. One of a Baha'i, Dominic Brookshaw, is a fellow of that college, and it has a specialist, mainly Persian, but general Middle Eastern studies library. And he came over and basically took away several boxes of books. We've given a collection of books to a number of other Baha'i. There's a Baha'i Institute just been set up here in the UK. We've sort of stocked its library with our spare books. We sent a couple of boxes of books over. I think they've gone, or they were about to go, to the flat that's been bought in Bristol, in the house that Abdul Baha stayed in when he was in Bristol. That's been bought by the National Spiritual Assembly, and some books either have gone or will at some time go to there. We were, Carmel, just remind me what other donations we've made to other libraries. I can't remember now.
Manchester, Edinburgh.
Yes.
Lots of places, I don't know.
So yes, so we've been, these spare books do go to good use, but we still do have a large number, and also a huge number of spare journals as well. Nobody seems to want journals. So we've got boxes and boxes of copies of various journals. Okay, I wanted to talk a little bit about the online presence that we have, as well. I mean, obviously these days, a lot of libraries have an online presence and are gradually transferring their books to electronic form and putting them online, and we're trying to do that as well. So we set up actually, what I should start off by talking about is the cataloging, because we have, as I said, we have a list of all the books that we have, but it is a list. It's not a catalog in the sense that it's got most of the ingredients for a catalog, in the sense we've got it's in an access database, and we've got first name of author, surname of author, any editors, book title, publisher, date of publication, lots of fields of information. So it is structured in the form of a catalogue, but it's not accessible in the way that you'd normally access a catalogue. You just sort of do a search across the whole database, basically. And we've been sort of puzzling about what to do over several matters. First is what subject catalogue to use, as the subject headings to use, because there are various standard ones, unfortunately neither myself nor anyone that is in daily contact with the library is a trained librarian, and what seems to happen is that every librarian you talk to has a different opinion about all of this, both about the cataloging software to use and which system of subject catalogs to use. My original idea was that we would just use whatever the World Centre was using, and that would enable us then to just download or get access to the World Centre's entries, as it were, and just sort of import them into our catalogue, save us a lot of work, and it would, in a sense, then set up a standard for the Baha'i world. Other people then have access to that library catalogue, because you don't have access to the World Centre library catalogue, but you would have access to this library catalogue, and that would then set up a standard across the world for Baha'i books, cataloging. But when I looked into this further, it turned out to be somewhat disastrous. The World Centre, at the time that I started broaching this subject, was in the middle of a changeover. At that time, actually, it didn't have a librarian, and there wasn't a sort of a policy at all. And then when it now has a librarian, she has decided that the old subject cataloging system that was set up by Bill Collins, in fact, isn't a viability for the future, because it depends on someone having the expertise to create new entries in the subject catalog, new subjects, areas, and so on. And that requires quite a lot of expertise, apparently. And we couldn't, or rather the World Centre Library couldn't be sure of having the expertise on tap to create, to carry on with that system. So they've decided now to go to the Library of Congress system. But for the time being, at any rate, they're not re-cataloguing all their old books. So they have in fact got two catalogues, old books and new books. And that seemed to me a nonsense as far as us using that catalogue for our library is concerned. We can't sort of duplicate that in our library. So that idea went by the board, and so far we've not really made any progress either in choosing a particular catalogue, because again, I thought we'll just use the same software, cataloging software that they have at the World Centre, because then, you know, we would at least have some access to expertise in using that catalogue for Baha'i books. But they're using an extremely expensive Israeli software that I don't think at the Afnan Library would be able to afford. So that idea is also now out of the window. So we're now, as it were, well, we've been in a state of limbo really since the start of the library, of not really knowing what to do about either what software catalog, or what software cataloging software to use, and what cataloging system to use. So that's from that point of view. I'm just going to share the screen and just go into the Afnan library. If I can find it, here we are online. This is, you're seeing this screen, are you?
Yes, Afnan library screen.
Yeah. Okay, so this is the address is at the top there, afnanlibrary.org. And when you bring that up, this is the page you come to. And basically we've, the online library is, we have divided it up into these 6 categories. And you can, if you, so you have English and other European language publications, which is then subdivided into English books and English language journals. And we've got some books and we've got some journals, but not a huge number. So these are the books that we have at the moment. There are more actually stacked up waiting to be put on onto this list. And then in terms of English language journals, we have just 2 or 3. But I've sort of purposely chosen some of the sort of rarer ones that people are unlikely to have access to. At the moment, we don't have any papers up. As I say, in that second space will go both Mr. Balyuzi's papers and papers of other individuals that we have at some stage, but at the moment, there's nothing in that. And then we have these unpublished English language manuscripts. We've put up some academic theses these are the George Ronald manuscripts, the reject manuscripts that I was talking about, and then some other manuscripts that aren't George Ronald reject manuscripts. So, for example, in the George Ronald manuscripts, I think there are only 2 or 3 in each category at the moment, but we're hoping to sort of add to these as time goes by. So those are the 3 that are in the George Ronald list. These are some manuscripts, a couple of plays that Hassan Balyuzi, there used to be in London a very active youth theatre group back in the 1930s I'm talking about, and Hassan Balyuzi, David Hoffman, Molly Balyuzi, Marion Hoffman, Dorothy Ferraby, all of these people were in this theatre group, and Hassan Balyuzi used to write plays for them. So there's various, so I've put 2 of the plays that he wrote up on this website under unpublished manuscripts. So these are the sort of things we've got. We've also got Persian and Arabic publications, again divided between books and journals, and English language, and then one of the important things that we have online is this series, the Iranian Baha'i National Archive series, which is a series of 100 volumes, plus at the bottom here there are 4 index volumes. So 99 volumes and 5 index volumes. And these are all what existed in the Iranian Baha'i National Archives. Obviously, this is before the revolution. The National Assembly decided to create a photocopied series of these 99 volumes. And they distributed copies around the world, and one of the people who received a set of these was Mr. Balyuzi. And so these are all, as I say, from the Iranian National Baha'i Archives. There are collections. This is a collection of tablets of Baha'u'llah. These would be collections of tablets that individuals in the days before printing, you would get a copyist to copy tablets for you. You'd bind them together, and that would be your collection of Baha'i scripture. So these are individual, most of them, not all of them, most of them are just collections of tablets of Baha'u'llah, tablets of Abdul Baha, writings of the Bab, all from the Iranian National Baha'i Archives. So I'm just going to sort of randomly go into one of these. So this is the information about it that I've put on there. So there's a description of it, who transcribed it, and these are the tablets that are in this particular volume. So that's what each of those volumes, if you go to each individual page, that's what it'll look like. Okay, so that's a quick, and other materials I'm putting up gradually, some glossaries and research tools. So at the moment, the 2 things we have on there is Stephen Phelps's partial inventory of the works of the central figures of the Baha'i faith that Stephen Phelps talked about a few weeks ago is up on here. And there are samples of handwriting of early Iranian Baha'is collected by Muhammad Labib so that if you have a piece of writing, you may be able to identify who the writer is by looking at these samples of handwritings of early Iranian Baha'is. Okay, so that's the library. Then there are a number of other pages. There's an about page which gives something of the life of Mr. Balyuzi and the history of the library, as I've talked to you about. There's a needs page which talks about things, what we need, whether you want to send books, how to do that. You can also help the library by volunteering your time. Obviously, specialists, librarian, archivists would be welcome, but also just people who are willing to help with cataloging and so forth. Okay, so let me just go back. I think that's about all we need to look at here. Okay, I'm sorry this has gone on somewhat longer than it should have done because of various technical problems, and I apologize also for the technical problems. Is there anything, I mean, you're obviously free to come and look at this library. Oh, sorry, what I should also say is underneath here, I also have, Carmel keeps up an Afnan Trust Facebook page, which actually has the sort of latest news. She sort of is very good about putting up stuff about what, you know, things that are going on at the library. This is when Ramin Khadem and Farhan Khadem came up and brought all these boxes of tapes and books and periodicals that had belonged to the late hand of the cause, Dr. Varga. That's when they came up and delivered the books just a short time ago. So news about the library you can find on this Facebook page, which is basically just, if you look up in Facebook, Afnan Library Trust, you should be able to find it fairly easily. Up in the top there is the Facebook / Afnan Library Trust, all one word. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing now. Apologies for the technical hitches. Over to you, Graham.
Moojan, thank you so much for taking the time to walk us through the history of the Afnan Library and some of the challenges that you've had along the way. And you've raised issues of sustainability, conservation, cataloging, acquisition, retention, and then the vast project of bringing some of these materials online to share to a broader audience who can't necessarily visit you. So this is quite an overview of the library's situation that really gives us an insight into what you're dealing with. So we're very, very grateful to you and to Carmel for this presentation. So we have maybe 15 minutes available for questions focused on the project, and I invite those questions to Moojan and Carmel. For one thing, Moojan, it struck me that there are no librarians with cataloging skills who are currently working with you. It sounded like.
Yes, I mean, people like Bill Collins have offered, but you know, it's difficult to work with someone who's 3,000 miles away cataloging books. So we don't have anyone who's sort of physically on the premises.
Yes, that's in fact, that's what I meant, was like someone in the UK who could work with you closely.
That's right, yes.
And also, I just wondered about...
I mean, I think that's, sorry, can I just interrupt? I think the problem is that the librarian profession itself is in sort of a flux, as far as I can tell. I mean, I'm an outsider, but you have the sort of old-fashioned librarians who would sort of sit down and catalog a book, and then I speak to some librarians and they're sort of talking about QR codes, cataloging and putting onto QR codes and all sorts of. So, you know, every librarian you talk to has a sort of a different take on it, and there doesn't seem to be any sort of pattern that you can go down that all librarians would agree on.
Fair enough, yes.
That's one of our big problems.
Two questions, Elsa and then Steve.
Unmuted. Yeah, just you mentioned if you can hear me better. You just mentioned that you're kind of casting around for software, trying to figure out what to use. So I'm just curious about what you've looked at. Not that I have any answers, I'm just kind of curious. And the other question relates to that is in relation to the personal papers, if they're being cataloged with like the same system, the same software, or tables as the books?
Yeah, I wouldn't call it cataloging yet of the papers. All we've done is to look in each box and just very briefly describe what's in the box, but not listing all the individual items, just saying, you know, in this box there are letters from this date to this date, from, you know, addressed to Mr. Baluzzi or something like that. There isn't a detailed listing of the contents of the box. What we've got is basically just very approximate knowledge of what's in the boxes. And it's not on any particular cataloging system. It's basically all on spreadsheets, Excel spreadsheets.
Thanks. Over to Steve and then to David.
Yeah, thanks, Moojan, for a good A to Z overview of the Afnan library. Two things of interest. The papers of Claudia Coles. Do you have any rough approximation to a finding list? I'm interested because she corresponded with an early, what I would probably call proto-Baha'i in New Zealand in the well, they were friends, it seems, so, but I'm wondering if there's correspondence between the two of them. What's the state of those papers? Are they accessible? What do they contain? Just briefly.
Well, we have, you saw those library shelves. We have two whole, you know, sides of one of those shelves of boxes. It's, I can't remember what the numbers, it's about 100 boxes, let's say, of Mr. Baluzzi's papers. And as far as I remember, Claudia Coles is two of those boxes.
Right.
And it's full of correspondence, and we haven't listed them or anything yet.
No.
I mean, I have looked through them and they are very interesting. There's some, you know, letters from all sorts of early Baha'is. So I'm sure there's fascinating stuff in there, but we just haven't got around to listing. Sorry, yeah, go ahead.
I will look. I can look for you if you like, Steve. If you send me an email, I'll take a look. I'll take it down.
It'll just yeah, the trouble is it'll get me derailed down another research pathway. I'm trying to be focused on my cataloging, but yeah, no, I know they're there, and I'm pretty sure from the closeness of the relationship, they met in the United States before Claudia went to the UK, and I think they maintained that correspondence. She was a very early, so-called early adopter of the Baha'i faith, but for whatever reason became somewhat estranged or disconnected. But even in the late 30s, she was still publishing poetry referencing the master. So it'd be very interesting to see those letters and see if there's anything useful in there. Second question is about your acquisition. So people do dump a lot of books there, and there may be gaps in our collection in New Zealand that could be filled, especially serials. I'm particularly interested in those serials. We don't really have any suitable sets of UK or European serials here. So before you throw them out, please let me know. I just was wondering, are you just reliant mostly on donations, or do you have an active acquisitions program?
Yes, that's something I should have talked about. Lacking a librarian, we haven't actually set an acquisitions policy as such. What we've done is to say that we will accept and keep in the library any books in these subject areas, which I've already explained to you are the subject areas that Mr. Baluzzi was interested in, and that is the subject areas of the library, core of Baha'i books, and around that Iranian and Middle Eastern history and culture, and the comparative study of religion, basically, or the study of religion. So that is our the range of books that we will accept. But we don't, up to now, we have not actually gone actively out and acquired books, in other words, paid for books, because we've been receiving just, floods of books coming in. And until fairly recently, we didn't even have a complete list of them. And as Carmel was explaining, even now, as we're sitting here, there's 4 lots of books, including those books from Dr. Varga that have come in, and we haven't got around to looking through them and seeing what there is in
Sure.
them. We can't start acquiring books until we, at the moment, simply because there's no point in paying good money for a book when you might be receiving it tomorrow
Sure.
as a
Yeah.
donation. So we actually have not paid for a single book, which may sound very odd for a library, that we don't actually buy books. But that's the reality of the situation. We're getting so many books coming in that there's no sense in us paying money for a book. I'm a little bit worried that we will miss out on this vast number of books that are being self-published and just sold online. I would like to perhaps start systematically looking for those and buying those, because I suspect that so few of those will be sold that we won't get those coming to the library from donations from other people down the road. So I would like to get some of those. But at the moment, no, we don't have an acquisitions policy, because we're not acquiring in terms of paying for things. We just have an acquisition policy in terms of just what we will accept
Sure.
and what we'll keep in the library.
Okay, thanks, Steve. Over to David, your question.
Well, thanks. This has been a wonderful and very educating. It's very, very interesting to hear about the history of the library and the challenges associated with having a physical library. I'm curious about some of these boxes you referenced that contain material that hasn't been organized yet. I'm wondering, is that something you're digitizing and keeping privately for later use, or is that just going to remain in those boxes kind of until there's time to manage it in the future? Because digitizing can be done sometimes very quickly, and if you do that, then maybe you can put it into a retrieval system and kind of work with it easier if it's digitized than if it's just sitting in a box. I'm kind of curious about that.
As I explained, for Mr. Baliuzi's papers, we're not going to start doing any digitizing. We have digitized the photographs, but the actual papers, we're not going to start digitizing until this process of the committee going through and deciding what's sensitive and what isn't is completed. Once that's completed and we know what we can share with the public, I'm sure we will start a program of digitizing and putting online Mr. Baliuzi's papers, because they're important for Baha'i historians, and even not just Mr. Baliuzi's papers, but his father's papers as well, and so on. So yeah, in the long term, we will definitely do that, but we're at the moment held up because of this requirement of having a review of all of the papers. And if you think about it, any single letter could have sensitive information in it. So somebody's got to sit down and read every single letter. That's a long process, because there are hundreds and hundreds of letters in each box, and there are boxes and boxes and boxes. So it's going to take a while, I'm afraid, before any of this material hits the public. It's at the moment all being kept private until we finish this process. However, having said that, people have asked for individual things, like, for example, there's a Baha'i in Britain who's doing a biography of Charles Dunning. He learned that we have the diaries of Charles Dunning, which is obviously very important for someone who's writing a biography of Charles Dunning. So he asked for permission. So he asked for the library, for the diaries to be scanned and sent to him. And, we've done that. So that there are exceptions for people who've got pressing needs for particular things. We do scan and send to people, but it's not something that you can just sort of come and browse at the moment.
Well, thanks for the comments that have also been added in the chat box. Carmel, maybe look at those and just capture those suggestions and ideas. Any final questions for Moojan today?
Just another couple of questions. So storage of archival material, manuscripts and papers and whatever, is it in any kind of humidity controlled, temperature controlled environment, or is it just boxes on shelves at this point?
At this point, it's boxes on shelves. I mean, the actual environment of the library itself is reasonably good. We've got air conditioning, we've got shades on the windows, and we don't have any pipes going across the roof of the building. So it's reasonably secure, but I'm conscious of the fact that we should really be transferring this material into acid-free boxes and putting acid-free paper into, you know, in and all of that sort of stuff. I'm conscious of it, but at the moment it's beyond our manpower capabilities to do that sort of stuff.
Sure. It's good to keep the light off. Light damage is a major problem, especially in the southern hemisphere where we're this far south.
Well, we've got blinds on the window, which keeps most of the sun out.
I was also just curious about, I assume the National Spiritual Assembly has its own library system as well, in addition to, or are you the proxy library as well?
That's a sore point, actually.
Is it?
At one stage, the National Assembly gave the National Reference Library to the Afnan Library, and we actually started cataloguing it and so on. And then the National Secretary changed, and the new National Secretary wanted the National Reference Library back. So we've had to hand back the National Reference Library, and they have a National Reference Library in the National Baha'i Centre in London that we have returned to them.
Right. Okay. I noticed from seeing your catalog that you've been lucky to get a large dollop of books from George Ronald themselves. You seem to have got all of their proof copies as well, so that must have helped give you a complete set.
Yeah, some time ago the National Assembly, actually I think it was, wrote and said to the 3 publishers that there were at that time of Baha'i books in the UK, and said that, you know, could they send a copy of everything they published to the Afnan Library? It should be the sort of deposit library for Baha'i books in the UK. So George Ronald has been faithfully sending a copy of every single thing it publishes to us for many years now.
Steve, thanks for those questions. Just 2 final questions, Anton and then Masood.
My question is about any materials in Russian. Do you have Russian materials in your holdings? And if you do, what's your prognosis when we can see them on your catalog on website?
Are you talking about books, published materials, or papers?
Anything in Russian, actually.
Yeah. I think we've got very, very little in Russian. Offhand, I can only think of an Iran, Kitab-e-Iran that was published many years ago, and maybe 1 or 2 other. No, basically nothing. No, sorry.
Okay.
There are photocopies of articles in journals in Russian, but they're just photocopies. They're not original pieces.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, Massive, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Moojan and Carmel. I had a question with regard to the list of or catalog of the items in Afnan Library. That when you go to the search option, are these materials searchable? Because I tried, but I couldn't get anywhere. But of course, you refer to those active links, which you know, some of them highlighted, you can access to those, I presume. Is it right? Those links which are.
The search is only of the materials on the website. It's not a search of the catalogues of the books in the library. If you go down to the bottom of the page, you'll see a notice saying that we're hoping to put the catalogue of the books on the website, but we haven't done so yet because we haven't got the software to do it.
I see. So on the same token, with reference to the Persian, the Iranian Baha'i archives, of those collections of tablets of Baha'u'llah and Abdul-Baha and so on. Those ones, of course, you clicked on one which showed the actual index to the, tablets or collection. But do those individual tablets accessible or no?
Yeah, I'll just show you. I'll quickly share the screen again. All of these volumes are online and available. If I just go back to I just pick a random volume. Here you've got view document on website, download document as PDF, and most of them we also have a table of contents of what's in there. So if you view the document on the website, it comes up and you just page through. There's 298 pages of this particular volume. This is this particular volume. So that you can look at it online, you can download the PDF, you have various options, but every single volume has underneath, you have these two options, at least these two options: view document on website, download document as PDF. And most of them will also have the table of contents, which is usually one of the pages in the book that has the table of contents for that volume.
Oh, thank you. That's great. Thanks a lot.
Well, Moojan, thank you very much for this presentation today.
Steve seems to have his hand up, or did you just fail to put it down? Oh, yes, okay.
Thanks very much for this presentation, giving us insight into the Afnan Library project. It's been a long time in evolution. There may not be many similar projects that have come this far around the Baha'i world, but a number of the, we say, teething issues, but it's 4 decades of teething issues. So I don't know if you call it that, but it's much appreciated, this presentation that you've made today. So wishing you all the best for the future completion of your aspirations and moving on to the next stages. Everybody's applauding, and thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.